The Fitting, Part 2. The Beauty of Soft Revenge Has a Name. Chapter 7. After Midnight. The party ended the way expensive parties ended, not with a finish, but with a thinning. Guests departed in increments, the room losing its density gradually, the conversations becoming longer and more selective as the night wore on, and the people who remained were the ones who had decided, consciously or not, that they were not yet ready to return to whatever version of themselves existed outside this room. The staff moved through the thinning crowd with the practiced quiet of people who had learned that invisibility was a service, collecting glasses, adjusting candles, maintaining the atmosphere past the point where most of the atmosphere had already left. Harlow had stayed. Not because she wanted to, the operational part of her was tired in the specific way of someone who had been managing multiple layers of performance for 4 hours, the sustained effort of being watched and watching simultaneously, the constant low-level expenditure of being precisely what the situation required and nothing more. She wanted the cold of the street and the silence of her cover apartment and 6 hours of sleep that she would not fully get. She had stayed because Cassandra had stayed, and because the quality of Cassandra's attention had shifted over the course of the evening in a direction that required monitoring. Cassandra was still warm, still gracious, still the weather of the room. But she had drawn closer to Harlow over the past hour in the way of someone executing a recalibrated approach, not pursuing, nothing as obvious as that, simply ensuring that the evening ended with the two of them in proximity. With Cassandra's warmth having had sufficient time to do the work she had decided it needed to do. Managing for pride. Looking for the soft place. Harlow let her look. She received Cassandra's warmth with the open, slightly grateful quality of the cover, the woman who had won something back at the table and was perhaps feeling the mild social vertigo of having surprised herself, who might now be susceptible to the kindness of the person she had surprised herself in front of. She let Cassandra refill her coffee. She let Cassandra touch her arm twice in conversation, the proprietary warmth of a mentor, a patron, a woman who had decided that the variable was manageable after all. She gave her nothing real. By 11:30, the room had thinned to perhaps 15 people. Marcus Vale had left at 11 with the gray suit man and 2 others, a small migration of finance and mild political adjacency that had said its goodbyes with the efficiency of people who had other places to be and other things to manage. He had said goodbye to Anaya with the particular warmth of a man who believed he was the one holding the thread of a relationship, the goodbye of ownership, proprietary and assured. Anaya had smiled at him with every appearance of warmth. Harlow had watched it from across the room and had felt the thing that was colder than anger make itself briefly known before she put it back where it lived. 3 of the chosen women had also left, gathered by the same quiet logistics that had delivered them, coats appearing, cars materializing. They had left with the specific quality of people who had been handed an extraordinary evening and were still holding it carefully, the way you held something you didn't want to spill. Happy. Genuinely happy. The evening had been beautiful and Cassandra had been warm, and they were leaving with something they hadn't had this morning. Harlow had watched them go, and the cold, useful thing had required more active management than usual. 3 women left. Which meant 3 women who were now, in the language of the spreadsheet, pending assessment. Which meant whatever happened next happened to them. Which meant the operations timeline, always a pressure, had just become a different kind of pressure, not the abstract urgency of a case, but the specific urgency of 3 women who had gone somewhere in a car and didn't know what the car was part of. She could not move yet. The case was not there yet. She noted this. She filed it under cost of the work, which was a folder she had been maintaining for 11 years, and which had never stopped being heavy regardless of how practiced she had become at the filing. At 11:45, Cassandra was drawn into a conversation in the far corner of the room, the political money woman and a man Harlow hadn't placed yet, something about a foundation, a gala of a different kind. Cassandra's attention going fully to the new conversation with the focus of someone who recognized an opportunity and knew how to attend to it. Harlow set down her glass. She moved. Not toward the east corridor this time. She had what she needed from there. She moved toward the arch, through the smaller room, and past it to the corridor that ran along the back of the building's second floor. And she followed it past the cloakroom and the staircase and the door she had come through earlier until she found herself back at the door to the balcony. She had not consciously decided to come here. She decided not to examine that too carefully. She pushed the door open. Anaya was there. Of course Anaya was there. She was standing at the balustrade the same way she had stood there before, arms folded, breath clouding, the deep-water dress entirely wrong for February and entirely right for the person wearing it. She turned when the door opened and she looked at Harlow with an expression that suggested she had not been surprised and was making a small private note of the fact that she hadn't been. "The party's thinning," Harlow said. "I know," Anaya said. 3 of the women left. "I saw the timeline." "I know," Harlow said. She came to the balustrade. The cold arrived in its complete and immediate way, and she felt it across her shoulders and at the back of her neck and in her hands, which she folded over the stone because the stone was at least solid. They stood for a moment in the way they had stood before, parallel, looking at the courtyard, the lamp below throwing its patient circle of warmth. "Cassandra watched you for 40 minutes after the table," Anaya said. "I know. She's not angry," Anaya said. "That's what I want you to understand. She's not embarrassed or wrong-footed or managing her feelings. She's problem-solving." A pause. "She looked at you the way I look at a story that isn't coming together the way I expected. Not frustrated. Interested." "She recalibrated," Harlow said. "She recalibrated," Anaya confirmed. "She's going to come at you differently. Softer, maybe. Or she'll try to find something you need, not something you want, something you actually need, and offer it." A pause. "She's very good at finding those things." "She found you," Harlow said. It came out more directly than she had intended. She felt Anaya go still beside her, the particular stillness of someone who had been handed something and was deciding what to do with it. "She found what she was looking for," Anaya said carefully. "Whether that was me is a different question." Harlow said nothing. "Let the silence be what it was." "She told me," Anaya said after a moment in the 3rd week, "that she'd been looking for someone exactly like me. That I had a quality of seeing things," her words, "that was rare." A short pause. "I thought she meant the journalism." "She meant it as intelligence," Harlow said. "Information about how to manage you." "I know that now." A beat. At the time it felt, she stopped. Started again. It felt accurate. Which was the thing. She wasn't wrong. She just wasn't saying it for the reason I thought she was saying it. Harlow looked at the lamp in the courtyard. "That's how she works. The warmth is real. The seeing is real. She just uses what she finds." "Yes." Quiet. 6 months of someone seeing you clearly and using it. Another pause, smaller, more internal. "It does something. Even when you know. Even when you think you're the one running the approach." Harlow turned her head and looked at Anaya. Anaya was looking at the courtyard. Her profile in the dark was composed, the composure of someone who had decided to say a true thing and was now in the slightly exposed position of having said it, holding steady in the exposure rather than retreating from it. She was, Harlow thought, one of the most self-possessed people she had ever stood next to. And that made the honesty of what she had just said cost more, not less. The self-possessed paid a higher price for admission. "It does something," Harlow agreed. Anaya looked at her. Close, in the February dark, with the city above and the courtyard below and the sounds of the party muffled to almost nothing through the closed door. Harlow was aware of several things simultaneously in the way that she was sometimes aware of things when the professional management of her attention slipped a fraction, not failed, just slipped, the way a grip slipped when the hands were tired. The way Anaya's breath made small clouds in the cold air. The particular quality of her attention, which was total and unhurried and had the weight of a person who, when they looked at you, was actually looking at you rather than at the idea of you or the version of you they had already decided on. The loose strand of dark hair at her neck that the cold air had moved. The distance, or the lack of it. "I want to tell you something," Anaya said. Her voice was low. The tone she used for private things, which Harlow had learned to distinguish over the course of the evening from the tone she used for everything else. "All right," Harlow said. "When you did what you did at the table, the grandmother, the language, the chocolate, a very small pause, the ghost of the genuine smile, I had to remind myself what I was doing here." Harlow looked at her. "That is not," Anaya said, with the deliberateness of someone making something precise, "the kind of distraction I can afford right now." The sentence sat in the cold air between them, full and clear and making no effort to be anything other than what it was. Harlow was quiet for a moment. She thought about 11 years. She thought about the folder marked "Not Yet." She thought about 3 women in a car tonight and 14 names and a compound upstate and a spreadsheet with a drop-down that waited. She thought about the fact that Anaya had just been honest, precisely and vulnerably honest, and that honesty deserved the same in return. "No," she said. "It isn't." Anaya held her gaze. The lamp below threw its circle. The city breathed. The cold was complete and thorough and present in every square inch of the space between them, which was not very much space, which had been getting incrementally less space over the course of the evening without either of them having made a decision about it. "After," Anaya said. "Not a question." "After," Harlow said. It was not a promise, exactly. It was more precise than a promise. A promise was about intention. This was about certainty. The acknowledgement of a thing that was already true and was simply waiting for the circumstances to allow it to be true out loud. Anaya looked at her for one more moment. Then she looked away. Back to the courtyard, back to the lamp, back to the professional distance that they both needed and that the city provided in its reliable, indifferent way. 3 women left tonight, she said. "Yes," Harlow said. "We need to move faster." "Yes," Harlow said. "I have a contact at the county registrar's office," Anaya said, slipping into the register of work the way you slipped into a coat, with the practiced ease of something worn often. "She can get me property records for the Meridian Holdings Trust. If the compound is there, I can have a location within 72 hours. My supervisor needs to know about Vale," Harlow said. "Not everything yet. Enough to start building the connection between his committee work and the missing reports." "Agreed." A pause. "How do we communicate?" "Not like this. Not in person. Not until we know the department isn't being monitored." "Encrypted drop," Harlow said. "I'll set one up. Give you access tomorrow." "Good." Anaya straightened from the balustrade. The shift of a person returning to readiness, collecting themselves back into operational shape. "I should go back in. If Vale checks." "He's gone," Harlow said. "His people aren't," Anaya said. "There are 2 of them still in the room. I made them in the first hour. One was watching the other chosen women. The other was watching me." Of course there were. Of course Vale had left observers. Of course the operation was more embedded in the room than the room itself revealed. Harlow added this to the file, the growing file, the file that had arrived tonight as a case and was leaving as something considerably more complex. "Go," she said. Anaya went. The door opened and the muffled sounds of the party arrived briefly, and then the door closed and Harlow was alone on the balcony with the cold and the courtyard and the lamp. She stood for a long moment. "After," she thought. The word had a shape to it that she was not entirely accustomed to. She was accustomed to before and during and once it's done, and the operational grammar of a life built around cases. After was a different country. She knew its name. She had visited it occasionally, briefly, always with the awareness of the flight home. This felt like something that would require more than a visit. She noted that. She did not file it. Some things, she had decided, were not for the folder. Some things you just held. She went back inside. Cassandra found her 30 seconds after she returned to the main room, which meant Cassandra had been watching the corridor. The approach was warm and private, a hand on Harlow's arm, a drawing in that suggested intimacy, shared space. "I've been thinking," Cassandra said, with the smile that arrived gradually, that was revealed rather than performed, that tonight was just a beginning. Harlow looked at her. Let the cover settle back into place, the mild openness, the slight softening at the edges that Cassandra would read as susceptibility. "There are things I'd like to show you," Cassandra said. "Places. Possibilities." The hand on her arm, light and certain. "I think you're someone who deserves more than one evening." Harlow thought, there it is. The recalibration in its final form. Not the table, not the performance, this. The private offer. The next door. She thought about the spreadsheet. The drop-down. Transfer eligible. She thought about 3 women in a car. She thought, "You will show me everything." "I'd like that," she said. Cassandra's smile settled into something that looked, from the outside, like satisfaction. And perhaps it was. The satisfaction of a woman who had found the soft place, finally, underneath the pride. She had not found it. She had found exactly what Harlow had put there for her to find. The lamp in the courtyard burned below. The city went on. Somewhere upstate, 40 acres waited in the dark, patient as everything that knew how to wait. The night was not finished. Neither were they. Chapter 8: Cracks in the Glass. The encrypted drop was a dead letter system that Harlow had built herself 3 years ago, for a different operation that had required communication with a source who couldn't be seen near a precinct and couldn't be called on anything traceable. It lived on a server in Estonia that she paid for with a card registered to a name that had never existed, and it had the specific quality of things built for necessity, functional, invisible, entirely without elegance. She gave Anaya access on a Tuesday. By Thursday morning there were 11 files waiting in the drop. She read them at the Cover apartment, a 1-bedroom in Hell's Kitchen that the department maintained for deep operations, furnished with the convincing minimalism of a woman who had not accumulated much. Which was accurate to the cover and not entirely inaccurate to Harlow's actual life, a parallel she did not spend time on. She sat at the kitchen table with coffee and read. Anaya worked the way Harlow had expected she worked, with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had learned that the story was always in the documents, never in the drama, and who had applied that principle to 6 months of material with a patience that was its own form of discipline. The financial records first. Meridian Holdings incorporated in Delaware 11 years ago, 1 year before the compound property was purchased, which meant the infrastructure had preceded the operation, which meant this had been planned rather than evolved. The shell company was owned by a trust. The trust was administered by a law firm. The law firm had 3 named partners, 2 of whom appeared in the donor lists of 3 separate political action committees, one of which had funded the campaign of a city councilman who now sat on the committee that processed permits for facilities of exactly the kind the compound would require. This was how these things worked. Not a conspiracy drawn on a board with red string. A network of ordinary arrangements, each one explicable in isolation, each one performing a legitimate function, the whole of it assembling into something that required deliberate looking to see. The property records next. Anaya's contact at the county registrar had come through. The compound was real 42 acres in Dutchess County, the property titled to a subsidiary of Meridian Holdings called Greenfield Agricultural Partners, no agricultural activity on record in 8 years. A single structure on the property that the permit filings described as a residential facility for agricultural workers. The permit had been approved by the county planning board. One of the 3 planning board members who had voted to approve it had received a campaign contribution from the law firm's PAC 6 weeks before the vote. Ordinary arrangements. Harlow read through the rest, correspondence between Vale and 2 members of the deputy mayor's office, as Anaya had described, 3 months of it, carefully documented. On the surface, it was the correspondence of a developer and city officials discussing zoning. Beneath the surface, and it required the kind of reading that Harlow had spent 11 years developing, the reading between the lines, the reading of what was not said and why it was not said. It was something else. Favors traded in the language of process. Outcomes managed in the language of procedure. And then the last file. The one Anaya had labeled simply, "Read this last." It was a list. 14 names. Not the 11 from the department file plus 3 more, as Harlow had understood on the balcony. 14 names with dates and details that made the department file look like a rough draft. Anaya had built profiles. Each woman, her approximate age, her circumstances at the time of contact, how she had been cultivated, what had been used, how long the cultivation had taken. Dates of last confirmed contact with anyone outside the operation. Dates of disappearance, though disappearance was not the right word. Departure was not the right word. None of the words the language provided were quite right for what had happened to these women, because what had happened to them had been designed to look like a choice. She read each one. She had learned, early in her career, not to stop at individual entries in files like this. Not because the individuals didn't matter, but because stopping made the next entry harder and the entry after that harder still, and eventually you either stopped stopping or you stopped being able to do the work. She had learned to read through, to hold the weight of the whole rather than breaking under the weight of each part. She read through. And then she stopped. Because one of the entries near the end had a detail she hadn't seen in the department file. A detail that wasn't about the missing woman herself, but about the missing report, specifically, about who had processed it, which precinct had received it, which desk it had landed on. She read the detail 3 times. She set the tablet down. She sat for a moment with the kitchen and the coffee and the thin February light coming through the window of an apartment that wasn't hers, and she felt the specific chill of a thing she had suspected without quite believing become real in the reading of it. The report had been processed by a detective in her own precinct. Not a peripheral figure, someone she knew. Someone who had been in the building on the day she received her briefing for this operation. Someone who had, she now understood with the retrospective clarity of a pattern that had been invisible until the right document made it visible, been in a position to know exactly what she had been sent in to find. She thought about the spreadsheet. Unusually self-possessed. May require extended handling. Recommend close monitoring. She thought about how thorough the file on her had been. For days of photographs before the approach on West 28th. A profile built with the specific detail of someone who had access to more than sidewalk observation could provide. She thought, they knew I was coming. She thought, how much do they know? She called her supervisor from a payphone on 9th Avenue, which was the kind of thing that required knowing where payphones still existed in New York City, which was operational knowledge she had maintained precisely for situations like this one. Detective Sergeant Rosa Vega picked up on the second ring. She had the quality of someone who was never entirely off, not alert in the tense way of people running on adrenaline, but present in the continuous way of someone whose attention to the work was simply a permanent condition. "Bishop," she said. "I need a face-to-face," Harlow said. "Off-site. Today." A pause. Not hesitation. Processing. "How serious?" "The operation has a hole in it," Harlow said. "A specific one." Another pause. "The bakery on 43rd. 2 hours." The line went dead. Vega was already there when Harlow arrived, at a corner table with coffee and the specific composure of a woman who had been managing serious situations for long enough that seriousness itself had become a resting state. She was 60, compact, with the kind of face that looked like it had been exposed to a great deal of weather and had decided to be fine with that. She had run 2 previous operations that had put powerful people in cells. She was the one person in the department Harlow had been certain of since the beginning. She was less certain now. Not of Vega. Of the building Vega worked in. She sat down. She did not open with preamble. The missing report on Elena Vasquez, she said. Case number 4471, V. Who processed it? Vega looked at her steadily. Where did you get that? I have a source, Harlow said. Reliable. The report was received by this department. Someone processed it and buried it. I need to know who. Vega was quiet for a moment. The bakery moved around them, the mid-morning crowd, the counter service, the smell of something warm. Ordinary life performing its ordinary functions around a table where something was being said that had the potential to break a significant number of things. I pulled that report myself, Vega said, 6 months ago, when I was building the case for your operation. It wasn't buried. A pause. It was reassigned. Marked as a voluntary departure. Signed off by, she stopped. Harlow watched her. Vega's face did something careful. The look of a woman arriving at an intersection she had perhaps been approaching for longer than she'd acknowledged. Signed off by Detective Aaron Marsh. Harlow said nothing. Marsh. She knew the name the way you knew the names of people in the same building, the specific familiarity of shared space, shared coffee machines, shared elevators, the accumulated ambient knowledge of proximity. She did not know him well. She had not needed to know him well. She needed to know him very well now. How many others? She asked. I need to go back through. How many others? Harlow said again, evenly. Vega looked at her table for a moment. I'll know by tonight, she said quietly. I'll know by tonight, and then I need to know everything you have. Tonight then, Harlow said. She stood. Rosa. Vega looked up. Who else knows the scope of my operation? Vega's jaw tightened. A small controlled thing. Myself. The unit commander. And the 2 officers who processed the initial intelligence. One of those 4 has been talking, Harlow said. She left the bakery. She messaged Anaya through the drop at noon. Department compromised. Identifying the leak. Do not use my supervisor's name in any document. Sit on the Veil correspondence until I say. Anaya's response came within 4 minutes. Understood. Found something else. The compound property. There's a variance application filed last month. Expanded residential capacity. They're planning to bring in more women. Harlow read it twice. How many more? The variance requests capacity for 32. She sat with that for a moment. 32. Not the 14 she had. Not a manageable number that a coordinated operation could account for in a single movement. 32 women in a facility in Dutchess County, 40 acres, a structure that called itself residential housing for agricultural workers, administered by a shell company owned by a trust run by a law firm connected to a network of ordinary arrangements that had been in place for 11 years. She typed, how long until the variance is processed? 6 weeks. Maybe 8. 6 to 8 weeks. Which meant the timeline she had been working with, the slow build of a case, the methodical accumulation of evidence, the careful approach of an operation designed to bring the whole system down rather than just its visible surface, had just been revised. She typed, we need to move faster. I know, Anaya wrote back. I've been thinking about that. A pause. Then, there's another gala. Cassandra's Inner Circle, invitation only. I found a reference to it in the Veil correspondence. 6 weeks from now. The compound transfers happen after this one. Not the first gala. The second. Harlow read it. Read it again. The second gala was the mechanism. The first one was the selection, the scoring, the assessment, the identification of the women who would be transferred. The second one was the delivery. More exclusive, more private, the inner circle only. The people who weren't just participants in the game, but invested in what the game produced. And it was 6 weeks away. I need to be at the second gala, she typed. The response took longer this time. She imagined Anaya on the other end of the drop, wherever she was, whatever she was doing, reading that sentence and running the same calculations Harlow was running, the same map of risk and necessity and what the 6 weeks between now and then would cost. So do I, Anaya wrote finally. And then, a minute later, "Are you all right?" Harlow looked at the question. It was a small question. The kind of question that appeared in the margins of operational exchanges that didn't belong there and arrived anyway because some people were built in a way that made the margins as important as the text. She thought about the entry in the file, the detail about her own precinct, the image of Aaron Marsh's name on a form that had erased a woman's disappearance from the official record. She thought about the folder marked cost of the work. "I will be," she typed, "when this is done." Another pause. Then Anaya wrote something that wasn't operational, wasn't strategic, wasn't the language of the case. It was 5 words, and it sat in the drop like the lamp in the courtyard, small, specific, throwing a circle of warmth into the dark. "I'll be there for that." Harlow read it. She did not respond. She didn't need to. She closed the drop and sat in the cover apartment with the February light coming through the window and the city making it sound below, and she held the 5 words the way she had decided to hold certain things, not filing them, not managing them, just holding them. Outside, New York went on. 6 weeks. 32 women. 1 leak in a department. A second gala at the end of it. The case had been complicated. Now it was a race. Chapter 9, The Almost. 3 weeks into the 6, Harlow stopped sleeping properly. Not dramatically. Not the kind of not sleeping that announced itself, the ceiling staring, the 3 a.m. reckoning, the operatic insomnia of film and fiction. It was quieter than that. She would sleep for 4 hours and then be awake with the specific alertness of a mind that had decided the night's processing was complete and the remaining hours were better used. She would lie in the dark of the cover apartment and run the case, not anxiously, just continuously, the way a program ran in the background, consuming resources without demanding attention. She had done this on other operations. What she had not done on other operations was find, in the rotation of things her mind ran in the background, a recurring entry that had nothing to do with the case. She noted it. She did not file it. She was getting less disciplined about the filing. The investigation had the quality, in these middle weeks, of a thing-gathering mass. Slowly, then less slowly, then with the particular momentum of a case that had reached the point where every new piece of evidence connected to 3 existing pieces rather than sitting in isolation. Vega had gone back through the files. 5 reports. 5 missing women whose disappearances had been processed through the department and reclassified, not buried dramatically, not deleted, simply redirected. Marked as voluntary departures or change of address or the various administrative categories that a bureaucracy produced for the purpose of containing things it did not want to fully examine. 4 of the 5 had Marsh's signature. The 5th had a different name, a desk officer 2 floors up, someone whose connection to Marsh was not yet established, but whose signature on that specific document was its own kind of answer. Vega had been careful. She had pulled each file personally, after hours, without logging the access in the system that Marsh could see. She was building a parallel record, clean, uncontaminated, a shadow file that would survive whatever happened to the official one. She had also, quietly and without discussion, changed the access permissions on Harlow's operation so that the only people who could see its status were herself and the unit commander, whose loyalty she had tested through 20 years of shared work and trusted accordingly. Marsh didn't know that Harlow knew, which meant Harlow's cover was intact. He might know she was undercover in the Cassandra operation, but he didn't know she knew about him. That asymmetry was the only advantage she had, and she intended to hold it until she could use it. Anaya had found the facilitator. Not Marsh. Marsh was the mechanism inside the department, the hands that redirected paperwork. Anaya had found the person above Marsh, the person who had approached Marsh in the first place, who had identified him as the right kind of man in the right kind of position, and had made him the offer that men like Marsh, with certain kinds of debts and certain kinds of compromises already made, found difficult to refuse. His name was Councilman David Park. 53. Third term. chair of the city's Public Safety Committee, which was precisely the kind of position that gave a person oversight of exactly the kinds of reports that had been finding their way to Marsh's desk. His connection to Meridian Holdings ran through 2 layers of intermediary and had taken Anaya 11 days to establish, but she had established it, a thread of money and access and strategic blindness going back 7 years, to a campaign that had received a significant contribution from the law firm. At a time when Park had been facing a primary challenge, he had not been expected to survive. He had survived. He had won. And he had, in the years since, been a reliable presence in the network of ordinary arrangements. He's the political layer Anaya had written in the drop. He doesn't know about the compound. I don't think he knows what the women are for. He knows there are women and that they disappear and that his job is to make sure the paperwork about the disappearing is manageable. I think he thinks it's trafficking of a conventional kind. He doesn't know about the arena. Does that matter? Harlow had written back. A long pause. Then, legally, probably not. Personally, another pause, shorter. I think it matters that he's been able to not know. That the not knowing has been a choice he's been making for 7 years. Harlow had read that and held it for a moment. Then, yes, it matters. They met in person for the first time since the gala on a Thursday afternoon, 3.5 weeks in. Not by arrangement exactly, or not only by arrangement. Harlow had a reason, a legitimate operational reason, a piece of the case that required in-person exchange rather than the drop. Physical documents that Anaya had sourced from the county registrar that needed to be in Harlow's hands before Vega's next off-site meeting. The reason was real. It was also not the only reason she was standing outside a coffee shop on Bleecker Street at 2 in the afternoon waiting for a woman she had spent 3.5 weeks communicating with exclusively through an encrypted server in Estonia. Anaya arrived 4 minutes early, which Harlow had predicted. She was wearing her own clothes for the first time, not the deep-water dress, not the performance of the gala, just a coat and a scarf and the particular way she moved through a sidewalk, which was with the same quality of attention she brought to every space. Taking it in, noting its exits, being present in it without being claimed by it. She looked different out of the gala context. She looked like herself, Harlow thought, and then immediately noted that she had no established baseline for what Anaya looked like as herself, which meant what she was actually registering was the absence of performance. The version of a person that existed when the room didn't require anything specific. She looked, in the absence of requirement, like someone Harlow wanted to keep looking at. She noted that. Did not file it. "You're early," Anaya said, arriving beside her. "You're earlier," Harlow said. "I'm always early. It's a character flaw." She looked at the coffee shop. "Shall we?" They sat at a corner table, both of them taking the seat with the wall behind them and then briefly acknowledging, with a look, that this was going to require a negotiation. Anaya moved to the opposite chair without being asked. The look that passed between them as she did was small and dry and contained a full paragraph of mutual recognition. The documents first. Harlow took them, reviewed them, noted the connections Anaya had annotated in the margins in handwriting that was fast and precise and slightly impatient, the handwriting of someone whose mind moved faster than her hand and had made a grudging accommodation. The compound's expanded variants had moved forward. A planning board meeting next week would likely approve it. One of the board members was the same one who had approved the original permit. The circle was closing. "When Vega moves," Harlow said, "it needs to be coordinated. The department action and your publication have to happen simultaneously. If the department moves first, Cassandra's lawyers will have the story locked down before you can run it. If you publish first, the department gets the warning and anything that can be moved gets moved." "I know," Anaya said. "I've been talking to my editor. She's ready to hold the story until I give the word and then run it within the hour." A pause. "She doesn't know the full scope yet." I've given her enough to know it's real and to understand why the timing matters. Can she hold? She's been holding bigger stories than this for 30 years, Anaya said, with a brevity that suggested the question had been mildly insulting and she was being gracious about it. Fair, Harlow said. The coffee shop moved around them. Afternoon light through the windows, the particular quality of New York winter light, which was thin and honest and made everything look slightly more itself than it wanted to. A couple at the next table having a conversation about a renovation. A student with headphones and a stack of books. Ordinary life. The second gala, Anaya said. Have you heard from Cassandra? Monday, Harlow said. She called the cover number. Wants to have lunch. She's moving you toward the inner circle. Yes. Which means she's made a decision about you. Yes. Anaya looked at her. That's the most dangerous part of this, she said. Not the compound. Not the second gala. This, the next few weeks, being close enough to Cassandra that she's actively bringing you in. A pause, and in the pause was something that was not quite anxiety, but lived in the same neighborhood. She's going to want to know you. The real version of the knowing, or what she thinks is the real version. She's going to apply everything she's built, the warmth, the seeing, the specific thing she does where she makes you feel. She stopped. She's going to use everything. I know, Harlow said. I know you know, Anaya said. I'm saying it anyway. A beat. Because I spent 6 months thinking I was running the approach and she was still finding things. She found things I didn't know were there to find. The sentence had a weight to it that wasn't about operational caution. Harlow looked at her. Anaya was looking at her coffee. She had the composure she always had, the self-possession that Harlow had clocked on the first night and had been cataloging ever since in the folder she was keeping for reasons she was no longer pretending were purely professional. But there was something underneath the composure right now that was close enough to the surface to be visible if you were looking, and Harlow was always looking. She found things in me that I'd been careful about, Anaya said quietly. Things I thought were managed. And she didn't use them cruelly, that's the worst of it. She used them the way you'd use a key. Carefully. With the specific intention of opening a door. What door? Harlow asked. Anaya looked up. The door that makes you want to believe the warmth is real, she said. The door that makes you start to think that maybe the person seeing you clearly is also the person who, she stopped again. Reorganized. The door that makes it harder to leave. The coffee shop. The afternoon light. The couple discussing their renovation. The student with her headphones. The ordinary world. She didn't open that door, Harlow said. Not all the way, Anaya said. But she had her hand on it. A pause. I just want you to know that she's very good at this. And that knowing she's doing it doesn't make you immune to it. I had 6 months of knowing and it still, she picked up her coffee cup, set it down. It still requires management. Harlow looked at her for a moment. At the composure and the thing underneath it and the precise, careful honesty that Anaya brought to everything, even the things that cost her. Anaya, she said. She looked up. What Cassandra opened a door to, Harlow said carefully, was not something she made. It was already there. She found it because it was real. A pause, and she chose the next words with the deliberateness she brought to very few things. What she did with it is on her. What it actually is, that's yours. That doesn't belong to the operation. Anaya was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her face. The careful composure held, but underneath it something eased, slightly, the way a thing eased when it had been held at tension for a long time and was given, briefly, permission to be less tense. Not relief exactly. Something more like being heard. That's a very precise thing to say, she said. I'm a very precise person, Harlow said. The corner of Anaya's mouth. The small one, the real one. The one that appeared without permission. You said that in chapter 1, she said. I said that at the gala, Harlow said. We're not chapters. No, Anaya said. We're not. The afternoon light moved. A cloud somewhere above the city shifted and the quality of light through the window changed, became briefly warmer, and in that warmth Anaya looked at Harlow with the full weight of her attention, which was considerable, which Harlow had felt from across a candlelit room on the first night, and felt now at a distance of 2 feet with the additional accumulated weight of 3.5 weeks of an encrypted drop, and a balcony, and 45 seconds, and 5 words, and everything that had been building in the margins. "I should go," Anaya said. She did not move. "You should," Harlow agreed. She did not move either. The distance between them across the small table was not very much distance. It had been getting less since Anaya sat down in a way that neither of them had engineered and both of them had noticed. The lean of 2 people in conversation who had stopped performing disinterest without making a decision to stop. "Harlow," Anaya said. Her voice was low and direct and had the quality it had on the balcony, in the dark, when she had said the thing about distraction. "The private register. The one without armor." "Yes," Harlow said. Equally low. Equally direct. "After," Anaya said. One word. The word from the balcony, returned now not as an acknowledgement of the future, but as a question about the present. The asking of it a kind of negotiation, not are we waiting, but how much longer do we wait? The coffee shop. The afternoon light. Somewhere in the city a case was building toward a conclusion that was 6 weeks minus 3.5 weeks away, and there were 14 women, and a compound on 40 acres, and a leak in the department, and a second gala, and a clock that had been running since the variance application, and that would not stop running because 2 women at a corner table in a coffee shop on Bleecker Street had gotten close enough to feel the specific warmth of the other person on a cold afternoon. "The case first," Harlow said. Her voice was steady. It required some steadiness. "I know," Anaya said. And then, "I know," Anaya said again, softer. She held Harlow's gaze for 3 more seconds. The 3 seconds had the quality of something understood completely, something that didn't require more words because more words would have been less precise. And then she picked up the documents from the table, tucked them into her bag, wrapped her scarf with the deliberateness of someone giving their hands something to do, and stood. "Lunch on Monday," she said, back in the operational register. "Between your lunch with Cassandra and Vega's offsite. There's a place on 46th. I'll leave the address in the drop." "All right," Harlow said. Anaya looked at her once more. Not the professional look, the other one. The one that cost something. "Case first," she said. Her voice had something in it that was almost dry, almost the banter, almost the sharpness that lived under everything she said, almost, but weighted with something genuine underneath. "Case first," Harlow agreed. She left. Harlow sat at the corner table with the afternoon light going thin again as whatever cloud had shifted moved on, and she held her coffee in both hands, and she looked at the door for a moment after Anaya had gone through it. And she thought about the word after and how it had changed shape since the first time it was said on a February balcony. On the balcony it had been a country with a name she knew. Now it was a specific place. She could feel its coordinates. 2.5 weeks. She could hold 2.5 weeks. She finished her coffee. She left a tip that was too large because she always left tips that were too large in places where people worked hard in small margins. She put her coat on and she went back out into the city that did not know what was building inside it, and she walked with her hands in her pockets and her face into the February wind, and somewhere in Dutchess County 40 acres waited. And somewhere on the other side of 2.5 weeks a word was waiting to mean something it hadn't been allowed to mean yet. She walked. The city held her the way cities held everyone, indifferently, completely, without asking anything she hadn't already given. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Chapter 10, Betrayal Adjacent. The lunch with Cassandra was on a Monday. The restaurant was in the West 50s, the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside because the people who needed to know where it was already knew, and the people who didn't know were not the people it was for. Inside it was warm and quiet in the specific way of expensive rooms at lunch, the hush of serious conversation conducted in comfortable surroundings, the particular piece of people for whom the afternoon held no urgency they hadn't chosen. Cassandra was already at the table when Harlow arrived. She was always already at the table. Harlow had come to understand this as a power arrangement so naturalized it had stopped being conscious. The host who arrived first was never waiting, only presiding. "You look well," Cassandra said, with the warmth of someone who had decided, 3 weeks ago, on a new approach and had been executing it with patience. The approach was softer than the gala, less the patron discovering a treasure, more the friend who had been thinking about you. She had called twice in the intervening weeks. Both calls warm, light, curious about Harlow's life in the way of someone building a map. Harlow had given her the cover's life in careful increments, enough to feel like disclosure, calibrated to reveal nothing real. "So do you," Harlow said. She sat. She let the warmth of the room and the warmth of Cassandra's attention land on the cover the way it was designed to land. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She was, she noted, slightly less comfortable with how good at this she was becoming. The lunch was 2 hours. In those 2 hours, Cassandra did several things, all of them well. She asked questions that appeared casual and were not about family, about where Harlow had grown up, about what she had wanted before circumstances had narrowed the wanting. She listened with the specific quality of listening that made people feel that their words were valuable, that the person across from them had been waiting for exactly this conversation. She ordered wine and didn't push when Harlow declined and then said, with the timing of someone who knew how to use timing, that she had been thinking about Harlow since the gala. "You surprised me," she said. Not accusatory. Appreciative. The warmth of a woman who enjoyed being surprised by the right things. Most people, when they're in a room that's new to them, they either perform confidence or they perform uncertainty. You did neither. She tilted her head slightly. You simply looked like someone taking inventory. Harlow smiled. Old habit. What kind of old habit? The kind you develop when you're not sure whether a room is safe, Harlow said. She let it sit as the cover's truth, the woman who had grown up around rooms that might not be safe, and watched Cassandra receive it, file it, add it to the map she was building. "I want you to come to something," Cassandra said. The natural arrival of a conversation that had been heading here from the beginning, laid as carefully as anything Harlow had laid in 11 years. A smaller gathering. More private than the gala. People I trust more specifically. A pause. "I think you'd find it interesting." The second gala. Harlow let something move across her face that was almost excitement, almost the relief of being included, almost the specific pleasure of a woman who had been outside for a long time being offered a door. Almost all of those things and none of them. "I'd like that," she said. Cassandra smiled. The soft place. She believed she had found it. The check arrived. Cassandra paid without looking at the amount. They walked out onto the street together and Cassandra touched her arm at the parting, the warm grip, the held contact, and said she would be in touch about the details, and Harlow said she looked forward to it. And they went in opposite directions and Harlow walked 2 blocks north before she turned east and let the cover settle off her shoulders like a coat she needed to air out. She was meeting Anaya at 12:45. She was 3 minutes early, which put her ahead of Anaya for the first time, and she chose a table near the back of the restaurant on 46th, and she ordered water, and she sat with the decompression of the lunch still running through her. The careful 2 hours of it. The sustained performance of receiving Cassandra's warmth and giving her the map she was building and feeling, underneath all of it, the constant awareness of what that warmth was for, what door it was trying to open, what waited on the other side. Anaya arrived at 12:44. She was wearing the coat again, the scarf, herself. She clocked the room in the time it took to walk from the door to the table, and she sat down across from Harlow and looked at her face and said, "How was it?" "She invited me to the second gala," Harlow said. "Good," Anaya said. Then, after a beat, "How was it?" Harlow looked at her. "You already asked that." "The first time I was asking operationally," Anaya said. The second time I'm asking the other way. The other way. The way that Anaya had that made Harlow less disciplined about the filing than she had been at any point in 11 years. It was 2 hours of being very good at my job, Harlow said. Which is fine. I am very good at my job. But. No but. Anaya looked at her. It requires, Harlow said carefully, a specific kind of sustained effort. Receiving something false as though it were real. Not performing reception, actually modulating how the warmth lands so that it lands like warmth and not like a system running. A pause. After a while the modulation has its own cost. You feel it, Anaya said. Not a question. Even knowing what it is. Even knowing what it is. Anaya nodded slowly. The nod of recognition, not sympathy, the nod of someone who had spent 6 months in the same specific kind of expenditure and knew its texture. She makes you want to believe it, she said. That's the skill. She doesn't fake the warmth, she produces it. The problem is only in what she does with it. Yes, Harlow said. Give it an hour, Anaya said. Then it stops following you. Does it? An hour, maybe 2, Anaya said. Then it's just data. Harlow looked at her for a moment. The way Anaya said that, pragmatic, a little wry, the hard-won knowledge of someone who had processed the same thing a dozen times and developed a system for it, was, she thought, one of the more quietly useful things anyone had said to her in recent memory. Thank you, she said. Anaya shook her head. Don't thank me. It took me 3 months to figure that out. A pause. Order something. You didn't eat at the lunch. How do you know I didn't eat at the lunch? You never eat at the performance, Anaya said. You ate at the gala because that was the beginning and you needed the reserves. But 2 hours with Cassandra 3 weeks later, running a recalibrated approach from her, and the second gala invitation on the table, you were too focused to eat. Harlow looked at her. I pay attention, Anaya said, without particular emphasis. I know, Harlow said. I find that, she stopped. Started again. I find it difficult to overstate how much I appreciate being paid attention to by someone who isn't using what they find. Anaya went briefly still. Not frozen, just the stillness of a person who had been handed something unexpected and was deciding how to hold it. The composure was intact. The thing underneath it moved. Harlow, she said. I know, Harlow said. Case first. That's not what I was going to say, Anaya said. Harlow looked at her. I was going to say, Anaya paused, precise as always, choosing. I was going to say that I pay attention to you specifically. Not as a subject. Not as an operational colleague. A beat. The distinction matters to me. The restaurant around them. The city outside. 2.5 weeks down to just under 2. Harlow felt the coordinates again. Closer now. She could feel the specific gravity of them, the pull that had been building since a candlelit dinner table and a 2-second look and everything that had accumulated in the margin since. It matters to me too, she said. Anaya held her gaze. The almost that had been building since the coffee shop on Bleecker Street, since the balcony, since the first look across the dinner table. It was here again, closer than it had been, the space across the table less than it had been in the coffee shop. The afternoon and the decompression of the Cassandra lunch and the simple reality of being with someone who paid attention specifically and used nothing she found. Harlow's phone moved on the table. Not a call. A message. From Vega's number, which only sent messages in 2 circumstances, routine operational updates, and things that required immediate attention. She looked at it. Call me. Secure line. Now. She was outside in 90 seconds. The secure line was a protocol she kept on a second phone, the operational one, and she had it to her ear before she had fully cleared the restaurant door. Vega picked up immediately. We have a problem, she said. The particular quality of Vega's voice when she said this, not urgent, not panicked, the flat, controlled tone of a professional delivering information that was bad but containable, told Harlow the problem was serious before the content of it arrived. Marsh knows the operation has moved, Vega said. I don't know how. I've been clean. I pulled nothing through the system. I ran everything offline. But he knows something has changed. He requested a file this morning that he has no operational reason to request. A file that would only be useful to him if he was trying to confirm the current status of an undercover operation. Which file? Harlow said. Vega told her. It was a welfare check file. A routine document that undercover officers submitted at 30-day intervals, confirmation that the cover was intact, that the officer was safe, that the operation was proceeding. It was the kind of document that had Harlow's cover identity in it. Not her real name, but enough. Enough for someone who already had partial knowledge to fill in the remaining gaps. Did he get it? Harlow said. I intercepted the request, Vega said. But the request itself is a problem. If he made it, he has a reason to make it. Which means someone told him something. The second phone in Harlow's hand. The street around her, the lunch crowd on 46th, the city in its afternoon configuration. She ran the calculation, who knew enough, who had access, where the information could have come from. The unit commander, she said. A silence. Rosa, she said. I don't know, Vega said. And the way she said it, the weight of it, the particular heaviness of 3 words that carried a whole different implication, told Harlow that Vega had been thinking about it before she called. If the commander is the leak, Harlow said, then everything Marsh knows came from him. Which means the scope of his knowledge is wider than we thought. Yes, Vega said. Does he know about Anaya? A pause. I haven't used her name in any document. Does he know there's a second source? I don't know what he knows, Vega said. That's the problem. I can't map the boundary of his knowledge without confirming to him that I'm mapping it. Harlow stood on the pavement with the secure phone and thought about the variants that had moved forward and the second gala 2 weeks away and 32 women in an expanded capacity facility and a clock that was not interested in complications. I need 48 hours, she said. Don't move on, Marsh. Don't change anything he can see. I need everything to look exactly as it did yesterday. Bishop, Vega said. If he knows you're 48 hours, Harlow said. A beat. 48, Vega said. The line went dead. She went back inside. Anaya read her face before she reached the table. Harlow saw it happen. The quick professional read, the assessment. And by the time Harlow sat down, Anaya's expression had shifted from where it had been a few minutes ago to the focused clarity of someone who had put one thing down and picked up another. What happened, she said. Harlow told her. Concisely. The welfare check request, the possible unit commander, the 48-hour hold. Anaya listened without interrupting, the way she listened to everything completely, with the full weight of her attention, filing as she went. When Harlow finished, Anaya was quiet for a moment. If the unit commander is the leak, she said slowly, and Marsh makes a move in the next 48 hours. My cover is blown, Harlow said. Yes. And if your cover is blown before the second gala, the whole operation collapses, Harlow said. Cassandra gets enough warning to move what can be moved. The compound gets emptied or the women get transferred somewhere we don't have a location for. She paused. And the women we don't find in time. She didn't finish the sentence. Anaya looked at her. Then we can't wait for the second gala, she said. We can't act without it, Harlow said. We don't have enough for an arrest that sticks. The compound location, the financial records, the Vale correspondence, it builds a case, but it doesn't seal one. We need Cassandra at the second gala, in the room, with the evidence of the scoring system and the transfer mechanism and the inner circle documented and present. We need the full picture or the lawyers dismantle it in 6 months. So we need the gala and we need to neutralize Marsh before he neutralizes you, Anaya said. In 48 hours, Harlow said. Anaya sat back. She looked at the table for a moment, the journalists processing, the running of it, the same way she ran documents, finding the thread, following it. There's a way, she said. Harlow looked at her. Marsh is useful as long as he doesn't know we know, Anaya said. If we can give him something, Something that looks like the operation's current status, but isn't, something that sends him in the wrong direction for the next 2 weeks. A false document, Harlow said. A credible false document, Anaya said. One that a detective with partial knowledge would believe. Something that suggests the operation has stalled. That the undercover asset has lost access. That Cassandra has become suspicious and the gala invitation has been withdrawn. She paused. If Marsh believes the operation is dead in the water, he has nothing to report upward. He goes quiet. And we have 2 weeks. Harlow looked at her. Can you build that? Anaya said. Vega can build it, Harlow said. If she agrees. Will she? Harlow thought about Vega. 20 years. The shadow file. The off-site meetings. The way she had said, I need to know everything you have, with the quiet fury of a woman who had spent a career keeping the building clean and had just learned part of the building was rotten. She'll agree, Harlow said. Anaya nodded. A single nod, decisive, the nod of someone who had found the thread and was ready to pull it. Then she looked at Harlow, and the operational clarity was still there. It didn't leave. It was always there, but alongside it, threading through it, the other thing. The thing from before the phone moved. 2 weeks, she said. Not the operational 2 weeks. The other 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Harlow said. We're going to close this, Anaya said. Quiet. Certain. Not a reassurance, a statement of fact from a woman who had been building toward this for 6 months and intended to finish it. We are, Harlow said. They looked at each other across the table with the case between them, and the clock between them, and the 2 weeks between them, and all the things that were waiting on the other side of the 2 weeks, and neither of them moved, and neither of them needed to. Because some things didn't need movement to be completely understood. Then Anaya picked up the menu. Now eat something, she said. You need the reserves. Harlow felt something move through her that was complicated and warm, and took up more space than the folder she wasn't using anymore could have contained anyway. All right, she said. She picked up the menu. Outside the city ran its afternoon, and above them the clock ran its 2 weeks, and somewhere in Dutchess County 40 acres waited, and somewhere on the other side of all of it a word was still waiting to be used properly, and would be, she thought. She was certain it would be. She held that certainty the way she held the things she had decided were not for the folder. Completely. Without managing it. 2 weeks. Chapter 11, The Second Gala. The false document had worked. Vega had built it in 18 hours, a welfare check filing that described, in the dry administrative language of departmental procedure, an undercover operation in its final stages of collapse. Asset credibility compromised. Subject became suspicious following an incident at the initial event. Gala invitation withdrawn. Recommend suspension of operation pending review. Signed with a case number that was real and a timestamp that was not, and routed through a channel that Marsh would be able to access without appearing to be looking for it. He had accessed it within 4 hours. Vega had confirmed the access without logging it. And then Aaron Marsh had gone quiet, no further file requests, no movement, the particular digital stillness of a man who had received information that told him there was nothing left to do. 2 weeks. They had bought exactly 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks had the compressed, over-detailed quality of time that knew it was running out. Vega had rebuilt the warrant application from the ground up, running it through channels that bypassed the unit commander entirely. A parallel process that required the cooperation of a federal prosecutor she had worked with a decade ago and who owed her a conversation if not a favor. Anaya had filed her property records and her financial documentation and her 3 months of veil correspondence in a sequence that built from circumstantial to conclusive. The architecture of the story she had been waiting 6 months to tell organized now into the shape of something that could run. Her editor was ready. 3 outlets were ready. The moment Anaya sent the word, the story would be everywhere simultaneously, and the lawyers would be managing a flood rather than a trickle. And Harlow had lunched twice more with Cassandra. Each lunch a performance. Each one a door opened slightly further. Cassandra moving her, carefully and with the confidence of someone who had done this before, from guest to intimate, from intimate to trusted, the warmth intensifying the way warmth intensified when it was close to its purpose. She had asked, in the second lunch, whether Harlow had anyone. Family, friends, someone who would notice if she was suddenly somewhere else for a while. Harlow had said no. Quietly. With the vulnerability of a woman who found the truth of that question difficult. Cassandra had covered her hand on the table. The warmth of it had required active management. 2 days before the second gala, Anaya had written in the drop, "How are you?" Harlow had written back, "Holding." Anaya had written, "One more performance. Then it's done." Then, after a minute, "Then we're done with all of it." The performances. Harlow had read that and held it and not responded because the response she wanted to give was not for the drop and was not for 2 days before the second gala and was not for a woman who needed all of herself present for what was coming. She had saved it. She was getting good at saving things. The invitation came by hand. A card, ivory with a black ribbon, the same colors as the shoebox, the same colors as the beginning of all of this, Cassandra's aesthetics as consistent and deliberate as everything else about her. The address was different from the first gala. Further uptown. A private residence, not a club, the inner circle small enough now to be hosted in a home, which was its own message about what this evening was. Harlow stood in the cover apartment and held the card and thought about West 28th Street and a shoebox and a cold February night that had been 6 weeks ago and felt like a different country. She thought about what was going to happen tonight. She thought about what came after tonight. She got dressed. The car that Cassandra sent was the same one as before, the private, deliberate black car with the driver who didn't look at his phone. Harlow sat in the back and ran the operational map one more time. Vega was positioned. The federal warrant, signed 48 hours ago and held in readiness, was with a team that would move the moment Harlow sent the signal. The signal was a single word to a number that routed to Vega's operational phone. The word was glass. She had chosen it because it was what she was going to do to Cassandra Vale's world tonight. She thought about the compound. Dutchess County. The facility that had been described as residential housing for agricultural workers and had been housing something else for 8 years. The expanded variants, approved 3 days ago, that had pushed the capacity to 32. Whatever was in that facility, whoever was in that facility, would have a team on site within 20 minutes of the word reaching Vega. She thought about the 14 names. She thought about the cost of the work and the folder and the fact that tonight the folder got lighter. The car stopped. The building was a townhouse on East 73rd Street, the kind of building that had been in one family for long enough that it had stopped being real estate and started being biography. Stone steps. A door that was opened before she reached it by a woman who was not staff exactly, too composed, too watchful, but performed the function of staff with the smooth efficiency of someone whose actual function Harlow was already assessing. Security. Light, internal, the kind that didn't advertise itself. Inside was smaller than the first gala. Deliberately smaller. 50 people perhaps, or less. The room had the density of a gathering that had been curated rather than assembled, every guest present because they had been specifically considered and specifically wanted. The art on the walls was the kind that had stopped being decorative and started being significant, not the art of a person who bought art, but the art of a person who understood it as a language. The chosen women were here. 7 of them. She counted before she had taken her coat off. Different from the first gala's women, some new faces, some who might have attended the first gala, the selection cycling in the way of systems that required fresh supply. They moved through the room the way the first gala's women had moved, with the extra care of people in borrowed clothes, in borrowed spaces, the particular quality of someone receiving an experience they had been made to feel lucky to receive. She felt the cold, useful thing arrive. She let it stay. It was useful. She needed it tonight. She took a glass of champagne. She did not drink it. She looked for Anaya. She found her in 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes longer than it should have taken, and which told her that Anaya had positioned herself more carefully tonight, more deliberately obscured, operating with the awareness that tonight was different from the first gala in ways that required different choices. She was near the back of the room, in conversation with a man Harlow didn't recognize, not Vale. Vale wasn't here. Vale had not been invited to the inner circle, which was its own piece of information about the hierarchy. The man was older, silver-haired, with the particular quality of men who had been significant for long enough that significance had become indistinguishable from their bearing. She would place him later. She filed the face. Anaya was performing the conversation with the focused ease of someone who had spent 6 months performing conversations and had developed the skill to a high level. She was wearing dark green tonight, different from the deep-water dress, different from their 2 weeks of encrypted drops and coffee shops and operational urgency, a color that the candlelight turned to something deeper and more complex. She had not looked at Harlow yet. She had felt her arrive. Harlow was certain of that. Cassandra materialized at her elbow with the timing of a woman who had been waiting for this moment and had chosen it. "You came," she said, as though there had been doubt. As though the doubt were touching. "Of course," Harlow said. Cassandra looked at her, the full attention, the warmth, the seeing. "You look different tonight," she said. "Different how?" "Settled," Cassandra said. The word precise. The word of a woman who had been mapping the terrain and believed she had found the right description for it. Like someone who has decided something. Harlow held her gaze. "Maybe I have," she said. Cassandra's smile arrived in the gradual way that it always arrived. "Good," she said softly. "I'm glad." She steered Harlow gently into the room, the hand at the small of her back, light and certain, and Harlow went, and the room received her the way rooms received people who had been vouched for by the right person. And she moved through it and catalogued it and held the cold, useful thing steady in her chest. The first hour passed in the way of first hours, the social machinery running, conversations forming and dissolving, the room organizing itself into the configuration that these rooms always found eventually. The clusters of genuine connection and the clusters of performance and the people who moved between them with the ease of long practice. Harlow was introduced to 8 people. She held every name. She placed 3 of them in the network Anaya had mapped, the law firm partner, a woman who sat on the Meridian Holdings Trust, a man whose connection to the planning board she had read about in a county document 3 weeks ago. She was building the room in real time, the way she built every room, adding it to the map. And she was watching Cassandra. Cassandra was, and this was the thing that Harlow had been preparing herself for and found herself not fully prepared for regardless, at her most extraordinary tonight. The first gala's warmth had been a performance pitch to impress. Tonight's warmth was the warmth of a woman entirely at home, among the people she trusted most, doing the thing she had been doing for 8 years with the ease of complete mastery. She was magnificent and terrible in equal measure, and the 2 things were completely inseparable. Harlow thought, "I see you." She thought, "You built something extraordinary and put it in the service of something monstrous, and I am going to take it apart tonight with the same tools you used to build it." She thought, "Glass. Not yet. Not yet." Dinner was served at 9. Smaller table than the first gala. 30 people perhaps, the chosen women distributed through the guests, the ratio different tonight. 1 chosen woman for every 3 or 4 guests rather than 1 for every 8. The inner circle wanted more access to the product of their selection, or the scoring required closer observation, or both. Harlow sat and ate and listened and catalogued. The scoring was happening. She could feel it, the particular quality of attention from certain guests directed at certain women, the way conversations were nudged in directions that tested, that sought the specific vulnerabilities the notes column had identified. A guest making a light joke at the expense of one of the chosen women, a joke that had teeth if you were looking for the teeth, watching to see if the woman deflected or absorbed. Another guest asking a chosen woman about her life before what was not specified, the before that the woman would fill in for herself, the wound she would open for someone who wanted to see it bleed a little. The clinical thing. The inventory. Harlow kept her face entirely neutral. Across the table, she felt rather than saw Anaya do the same. It was between the main course and dessert that Cassandra rose. No toast this time. Something quieter. She stood and the room's attention came to her the way it always came to her, completely, without effort on either side, and she looked around the table with the expression of a woman surveying something she had built and finding it good. "I want to say something," she said. "To the women who came here tonight as my guests." She looked at each of them in turn. The warmth in her face was real. Harlow understood this now in a way she hadn't fully understood at the first gala. The warmth was real. The seeing was real. The genuine belief that she was offering something extraordinary was real. Cassandra Vale had constructed a justification for what she was that was thorough enough to live inside without discomfort. "You're here," Cassandra said, "because you are exceptional. Because I found you in circumstances that did not reflect your value, and I have always believed, that value does not disappear because circumstances obscure it." A pause. "What I offer you is not charity. It is not pity. It is recognition. And after tonight, the opportunity to be recognized in a context that can change what your life looks like." The chosen women were listening with the specific quality of attention that hope produced, the leaning in, the receiving, the wanting it to be true. It was the most devastating thing Harlow had witnessed in 11 years of the work. Not because it was cruel, because it was almost true. She looked at Cassandra and she felt the cold, useful thing become something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but contained elements of both. And she thought about the 14 names, and she thought about the 3 women from the first gala in a car, and she thought about 32. She thought, now. She thought, not yet. Wait for the signal. Wait for the room. She waited. Dessert arrived. The room moved through it. The conversations continued and the scoring continued, and Harlow tracked it all with the flat, precise attention of someone counting down. At 10:47, Cassandra caught her eye across the table and held it for a moment. The look of a woman with something to say that required privacy. The look of the next door. Harlow gave her a small nod. "Later." "Yes. I'll come find you." Cassandra looked satisfied. At 10:52, one of the chosen women excused herself from the table. She was one of the newer faces, early 20s, with the stillness that Harlow had seen in the woman on West 28th Street on the first night, the stillness that was safety rather than peace. She walked toward the corridor that led to the bathroom. One of the guests, the silver-haired man Anaya had been speaking to earlier, watched her go. He made a small mark on something beside his plate. A physical scorecard. Small, discreet, the kind of thing that looked like a note if you weren't looking for what it was. Harlow looked at Anaya. Anaya was looking at the scorecard. Their eyes met. Anaya's expression was the composed one, the professional one, every layer of the performance intact, and underneath all of it, in the very back of her eyes where the calculation lived, something that was not calm. Something that had been building for 6 months and had just been handed its final piece of evidence and was now complete. She gave Harlow the smallest possible nod. She had what she needed. Harlow reached into the fold of her dress where the second phone was held. She found it without looking. She typed a single word. Glass. She sent it. She set the phone back. She looked at the room, the candlelight, the crystal, the art on the walls, the guests in their beautiful clothes, the chosen women in their borrowed ones, Cassandra at the head of the table, warm and certain and magnificent and terrible, and she breathed once, slowly. And she let the cold, useful thing become the thing it had always been underneath. Not anger. Not grief. Clarity. The room didn't know yet that it had 40 minutes. Neither did Cassandra. Harlow picked up her dessert fork. She ate. Chapter 12, Glass Everywhere. The 40 minutes did not pass evenly. Time never passed evenly when it was the last of something. It moved in the specific way of things that were almost over, some moments stretching and some compressing, and none of them having any relation to the clock on the wall. Harlow had experienced this before. The last minutes of operations had their own texture. She knew how to move through them. She moved through the remaining dessert and the coffee that followed it and the gradual migration of guests from the table to the adjacent rooms with the same composed precision she had brought to every moment of the past 6 weeks. She was introduced to 2 more people. She held their names. She smiled at the right times and listened at the right times and kept the cold, useful clarity steady in her chest like something she was carrying carefully. She watched Anaya do the same from across the room. They had not spoken since the nod. They did not need to. The operational understanding between them had reached the point where it functioned without language. They each knew what the other was doing and why and what came next. And the knowing was clean and mutual and required no coordination beyond the awareness that the other person was present and capable and had made the same decision. At 11:17, one of the chosen women started crying. It happened in the smaller room off the main reception, the room that had been set up with the particular intimacy of a private conversation space, 2 chairs and a low table, and the deliberate seclusion of a room designed to feel like a confidence. Harlow had noted it on arrival. She had noted its function even then. The scoring required privacy for certain moments, required the architecture of intimacy to produce the vulnerabilities the notes column catalogued. She heard it before she saw it. A sound that was being managed, controlled, the specific quality of tears that someone was trying to contain in a room that was not as private as it looked, because the door was not fully closed. And the guest in the chair across from the chosen woman had not been the one to manage the door, and management of doors was not his concern tonight. Harlow was in the doorway in 4 steps. The woman was perhaps 23. The stillness that was safety rather than peace, the same one Harlow had seen at the first gala on the woman who had left in the car, the same one she had seen on West 28th Street on the night this all began. The stillness of someone who had learned that smallness was survival. The guest across from her was a man in his 60s with the settled comfort of someone who had been doing this for long enough that he no longer experienced it as doing anything. He had been asking her something. Harlow could reconstruct the shape of it from the quality of the woman's distress, the specific kind of tears that came from a wound opened by a question designed to open it. He looked up when Harlow appeared in the doorway. Mild annoyance. Mild only. The annoyance of someone whose process had been interrupted rather than threatened. Harlow looked at him. She had a calculation to make, and she made it in approximately 1 second. The signal had been sent. The team was 23 minutes out, perhaps less. The operation required her to maintain cover for the remaining time, to let the room continue its evening. To not move until the team arrived and the room was contained and the evidence was documented by people with badges and federal warrants rather than by an undercover officer acting alone. She looked at the woman. 23. The stillness. The contained tears of someone who had been offered warmth and used it and was now understanding, in the specific awful way of someone mid-understanding, that the warmth was not what she had thought it was. Harlow looked at the guest. She thought, not yet. Hold. 20 minutes. She thought, no. She stepped into the room. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. Her voice was not the cover's voice. Not the lower register, not the flatness, not any of the layers she had been wearing for 6 weeks. It was her voice. The precise one. The one that did not waste words or cushion things that did not require cushioning. This conversation is finished. The man looked at her with the specific expression of someone recalibrating, not understanding yet, beginning to understand, the recalibration of a person whose evening had just produced an unexpected variable. I beg your pardon, he said. You don't need to, Harlow said. But you do need to stand up. He stood. Not because he had decided to, because something in her voice had communicated something that his body registered before his mind had finished its objection, the specific frequency of authority that required no uniform and no badge to carry. He stood and he looked at her with the annoyance becoming something else, something closer to wariness, and she held his gaze until the wariness was the dominant thing. "Go back to the main room," she said. He went. She turned to the woman. She crouched down so they were at the same level, not looming, not the authority that had moved the man out of the room, something different now. Something that required different posture and different voice, and the specific human awareness that the woman in this chair was 23 years old and had been brought here by someone she trusted and was currently in the middle of understanding what that trust had cost. "My name is Harlow Bishop," she said. "I'm a police officer. I'm going to explain to you what's happening in this building tonight, and then I'm going to ask you to stay in this room until some colleagues of mine arrive. Can you do that?" The woman looked at her. The stillness was there, but something underneath it had shifted, the recalibration of someone who had been in a specific kind of fear and was now encountering a different kind of situation, trying to map whether this was better or worse. "Yes," she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the control of someone who had been practicing it. "Good," Harlow said. "You're not in trouble. None of what happened tonight is your fault. And you are going to be all right." She paused. "I need you to believe that last part." The woman looked at her for a moment. "Okay," she said. Harlow stood. She looked at the door. She made a decision that was already made. She went back into the gala. The main room had the quality of an evening in its late stage, the loosening, the warmth of wine and time. The conversations taking on the slightly more personal register of people who had been in a room together long enough to have stopped performing and started simply being. The chosen women were distributed through it, some in conversation, some quieter, one near the window with the expression of someone having a beautiful time who did not yet know anything about the evening that she was going to know soon. Harlow moved through the room toward Cassandra. She was not performing anything now. She moved the way she moved when she was herself, with the economy of someone who knew where she was going and why and what it would cost. Several guests looked at her as she passed. Something in her bearing had shifted, and they felt it without being able to name it, the way people felt weather changes before they could articulate what the air was doing. Cassandra was near the fireplace with two guests, the law firm partner and the woman from the Meridian Holdings Trust, both of whom were in Vega's warrant and would shortly be having a different kind of evening than they had planned. She was laughing at something. The laugh was genuine. It always was. She looked up when Harlow approached. She read her face. The laugh finished itself, and in the silence that followed it, Cassandra Vale's expression did something that Harlow watched with the full attention she had been giving this woman for 6 weeks. The composure held, the warmth held. And underneath it something moved. That was the first crack, the first fracture in the surface of a woman who had spent 8 years operating without fracture. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. She knew. Before a word was said, before a badge appeared, before the door opened and the first sound of the arriving team reached the room, she knew. The warmth and the seeing that she had built and weaponized for 8 years now showing her, with perfect clarity, the face of the woman she had chosen and what that face meant. The two guests beside her were still talking. They had not read the shift. They were mid-sentence about something that had been important 30 seconds ago. Cassandra said nothing. Harlow said, "Cassandra Vale." One of the guests stopped mid-sentence. "My name is Detective Harlow Bishop," she said. "You are under arrest." The room fractured. Not violently. There was no violence in it, no running, no dramatic collapse of furniture or glass. It fractured the way things fractured when the structure that held them was removed quickly, completely, the shape of the evening dissolving into a different shape within seconds. Some guests understood immediately. These were people who had been in the operation, who had made the marks on the scorecards, who had sat in the study with a laptop and a glass of amber and reviewed spreadsheets. They understood because they had been waiting, on some level, for exactly this. The professional paranoia of people who operated outside the law, producing, in the moment of actual consequence, not surprise but a grim recognition. Some guests did not understand immediately. These were the peripheral figures, the ones whose connection to the inner circle was social rather than operational, who had been in the room because Cassandra curated rooms, and they had been curated into this one. They looked around with the stunned quality of people trying to reconcile the evening they had been having with the evening it had apparently been all along. The chosen women went still. Harlow did not stop watching Cassandra. Cassandra had not moved. She stood by the fireplace with the composure of a woman who had decided, in the moment of fracture, that composure was the only thing she still owned and intended to keep it. She was looking at Harlow with the expression, the full weight of it, the seeing, the extraordinary quality of attention that had been her instrument and her weapon. And the expression contained several things that Harlow catalogued with the efficiency of the past 6 weeks. Calculation. Still. Even now. And underneath it, something that surprised her. Something that was not quite respect. Respect was too mild a word and too generous a one, but was in the neighborhood of it. The specific look of a person who had been beaten by someone they had underestimated and was, in the moment of losing, acknowledging the underestimation. The shoe, Cassandra said quietly. The shoe, Harlow confirmed. I chose you, Cassandra said. You did, Harlow said. I let you. The door opened. Vega came in first, which was right. Vega had run this operation for longer than the room knew, and it was right that she came through the door first with the federal warrant in her hand and the specific composure of a woman who had been waiting a long time for this particular room on this particular evening. Behind her 6 officers, plain-clothed, moving through the space with the practiced efficiency of people who had been briefed and knew the layout and had specific names on specific pieces of paper. Anaya was in the far corner of the room. Harlow found her in the moment the door opened, found her the way she had been finding her across rooms for 6 weeks, the specific awareness of her location that had stopped requiring active searching and had become something more like orientation, the way you knew where north was without having to think about it. Anaya was watching Cassandra. She was not taking notes. She was not reaching for her phone. She was just watching, with the full weight of the journalist's attention that had built this case document by document over 6 months, watching the woman who had spent 6 months using the thing Anaya had at her own door against her. And then she looked at Harlow. Across the fractured room, across the 6 weeks, across the encrypted drops and the balconies and the coffee shops and the almost that had been building since a candlelit dinner table and a 2-second look, she looked at Harlow. Her expression was not the composed one, not the professional one, not any of the layers. It was just her. Harlow crossed the room. Not toward Cassandra, who was being approached now by 2 of Vega's officers with the specific efficiency of a lawful arrest. Not toward the guests who were being sorted into those who had warrants and those who didn't. Not toward the operational center of the room. Toward Anaya. She stopped in front of her. Close. The kind of close that was a decision. The kind of close that was a statement of intent in a room full of other statements of intent, the glass everywhere and the pieces of it being catalogued and collected, and none of it more important than this. It's done, Harlow said. Anaya looked at her. Her eyes were very dark in the firelight and very direct, and she had the expression of someone who had been holding something for a long time and had just been given permission to set it down. It's done, she said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Anaya said, very quietly in the private register, in the voice without armor, you said after. I did, Harlow said. This is after, Anaya said. It is, Harlow said. The room moved around them. Vega's voice, efficient and certain, reading Cassandra her rights with the flat, precise language of consequence. The officers moving through the space. The chosen women being guided, gently, by a female officer toward the side room where Harlow had left the 23-year-old, gathering them together, beginning the long, careful process of telling them what had happened in a way that could be received. Harlow and Anaya stood in the middle of all of it. Anaya reached out and took Harlow's hand. Not dramatically. Not as a gesture. Simply took it, the way you took something you had decided was yours, with the calm certainty of a woman who had been precise about everything for 6 months and was being precise about this. Her hand was warm. Harlow's was cold from the room, from the evening, from 6 weeks of keeping the cold, useful thing in her chest, and Anaya held it between both of hers with the specific deliberateness of someone who had identified a problem and was addressing it. Harlow felt something shift. Not dramatically. Not the way things shifted in films, no particular moment of fracture or flood. Just a shift. The way a thing shifted when it had been held at tension for a long time and was finally allowed to be something other than tense. The folder that she had stopped being able to use. The thing she had been holding instead of filing. All of it, the weight of it, the 6 weeks of it, rearranging itself into something that was not about the case. She looked at Anaya. Anaya looked back at her. "The women," Harlow said. Her voice was steady. "I need to check on the women." "I know," Anaya said. She had not let go of her hand. "Go. I'll be here." Harlow went. She went to the side room and she checked on the women and she told them, clearly and carefully, what had happened and what came next, and she meant every word of it because meaning every word of it was the thing she could do, had always been the thing she could do. And she did it with the full weight of the 11 years and the folder and the cost of the work and the 14 names and the fact that tonight the folder got lighter. She did it well. And when it was done, she went back to the main room. Anaya was exactly where she had said she would be. Chapter 13: Exposure. The arrests took 4 hours. Not just the townhouse on East 73rd Street, that was the center, the origin point, but the warrants spread outward from it like the consequence of a stone dropped in still water. Cassandra Vale, processed and composed, the composure holding through the reading of her rights and the ride downtown and the booking, holding the way things held when they had been built to last. The law firm partner. The woman from the Meridian Holdings Trust. The silver-haired man who had made marks on a scorecard while watching a 23-year-old walk to the bathroom. 6 guests in total from the townhouse, separated into those whose names were on warrants and those who were material witnesses and those who were simply people who had attended a party that had turned out to be something other than a party and who would spend the rest of the evening in rooms answering questions they had not expected to be asked tonight. Marcus Vale was arrested at his apartment on Central Park West at 12:40 a.m. He opened the door in a bathrobe. The officers with the warrant were polite and efficient, and Vale said very little, which was the response of a man whose legal instincts were still functioning even when the rest of him was not. Councilman David Park was arrested at 1:15 a.m. at a fundraising dinner he was attending in Midtown, a charity event, which had its own kind of terrible irony. A room full of people raising money for something good while the man at the center table was walked quietly out by 2 plainclothed officers who had been briefed on the importance of discretion. He said more than Vale. He said things that his lawyer would spend the next several months managing. He said, specifically and repeatedly, that he hadn't known about the compound, which was true and which was also beside the point in the specific way that Anaya had identified 3 weeks ago in an encrypted drop. The not knowing had been a choice, made and maintained over 7 years, and the law had a word for that kind of choice. Aaron Marsh was arrested at 2 a.m. at his home in Queens. Vega went herself for that one. Harlow knew she had because Vega sent a single message at 2:17 done, and the specific economy of it said everything about what it had cost and what it had been worth. The compound in Dutchess County was reached by a joint team at 12:52 a.m. Harlow got the call from the team lead at 1:04. She was at the precinct by then, the functional precinct, the one that was intact, the one that Vega had been protecting for 6 weeks. Processing the evening's documentation with the specific focus of someone who had been running at high capacity for a long time and had found, on the other side of the operation's conclusion, that the capacity was still running even without the operation to run it toward. The team lead's name was Ortega. He was experienced and not easily shaken, and his voice on the phone had something in it that was not quite shaking, but was in the neighborhood. "We have women," he said. 11 confirmed. "Possibly more. We're still going through the structure." 11. She closed her eyes for a moment. "What condition?" she said. A pause. "Varied," he said. "Nobody is in immediate medical danger." "But Bishop," he stopped. Started again. "The structure. What they built here. You need to see the documentation." "I will," she said. "Tonight?" "When you can," he said. "But, yeah, tonight." She wrote everything down. She documented the call. She added it to the case file that had been a cover apartment and a spreadsheet glimpsed at an angle and a balcony that wasn't on the floor plan and an encrypted drop and 6 weeks of building a thing carefully enough that it would hold when it was finally used. It was holding. Anaya published at 2 a.m. Harlow knew the moment it happened because the precinct's ambient noise changed, the specific shift of a room full of people who are trained to monitor information, encountering a significant piece of it simultaneously. Phones. Screens. The low murmur of people reading and the slightly higher murmur of people reacting to what they were reading. She did not look at it immediately. She had 4 more documents to complete, and she completed them first, with the methodical focus of someone who understood that the case was only as good as its paperwork and who intended this case to be very good indeed. Then she looked. The story was, she read it the way she read everything, completely and in a single pass, and she thought, she held nothing back. Not the financial records. Not the property documentation. Not the political connections, laid out in the specific language of evidence rather than accusation. Here is the money. Here is where it went. Here is the meeting that preceded the vote. Here is the report that was reclassified. Here is the name on the reclassification. Not the scorecard system. Not the compound. Not the women. The women were named. Every one of the 14. With their full names and the dates they had gone to a gala and the dates they had been reported missing and the dates those reports had been redirected and by whom. Named in print, in the story that ran simultaneously in 3 outlets at 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning, because Anaya had understood from the beginning that the women being named was the point. That the whole architecture of this operation had depended on these women being invisible, and the most direct way to dismantle that architecture was to make them visible. Harlow read the names. She read them slowly. All 14. She held each one the way she had been holding things lately, not filing, not managing, just holding. At the bottom of the story, in the final paragraph, Anaya had written something that was not the language of journalism, not the precise evidentiary language of the rest of the piece. It was shorter than everything around it, and it said, "These women were failed by the systems that should have found them. They were not invisible. They were made invisible, deliberately, by people who understood that the city would not look for them. The city was wrong not to look. It will not make that mistake again." Harlow read it twice. She thought about Anaya writing it. Sitting somewhere in the early hours of a Thursday morning, the story built and the evidence documented and the simultaneous publication arranged. And then writing those 4 sentences at the end of it because the story was not complete without them, and she was the person who understood that. She closed the screen. She finished her paperwork. At 4 a.m., the precinct had the quality of a place that had been through something and was processing it. The sustained activity of a major operations aftermath, the documentation and the coordination and the quiet efficiency of people who did this work because they believed in it and were now seeing a particular piece of it reach its conclusion. Vega found her at her desk. She sat down across from her with 2 cups of coffee that she had clearly made herself, because the precinct coffee at 4 a.m. was not something you sent someone to retrieve. She set one in front of Harlow and held the other in both hands and looked at her with the expression she used when she was not performing anything, which was rarer than most people's and therefore more valuable. "The compound," she said. "I know," Harlow said. 11 women. "I know. 3 of them from the first gala," Vega said. "The ones who left in the cars that night." Harlow looked at her coffee. "They're all right," Vega said. "Relatively. It'll take time. But they're all right." Harlow nodded. "The documentation from the compound," Vega said, "is going to take weeks to fully process." What Ortega described, she stopped. "It's going to be a significant case. Multiple charges. Multiple defendants. It's going to run for a long time." "Good," Harlow said. "Yes," Vega said. "Good." A pause. "You did well, Bishop." Harlow looked at her. Vega did not say things like that frequently, and when she said them, they were not performances. They were the flat assessments of a woman who had been doing the work long enough to know the difference between doing it adequately and doing it well, and who said so when the distinction was warranted. "We did well," Harlow said. Vega held her gaze for a moment. "The journalist," she said. "Roth." Harlow said nothing. "Her documentation was clean," Vega said. "Better than clean. The financial records she sourced, they filled 3 gaps in the warrant that I'd been trying to fill for 6 weeks." "She's thorough," Harlow said. "She's very thorough," Vega said. Something moved briefly across her face that was not her usual expression, something that was in the vicinity of warmth without quite arriving there. "She's also been outside for an hour. In case that's relevant information." Harlow looked at her. Vega picked up her coffee and looked at the middle distance in the specific way of a person who had said what they intended to say and was now simply having her coffee. Harlow stood. Outside was the particular quality of 4 a.m. in New York, not quiet, never quiet, but at the low register of itself, the city in the version of rest it allowed itself between the end of one day and the beginning of the next. Cold still. February had not finished with the city yet. The streetlights made amber pools on the pavement that the wet street reflected back in long, uncertain shapes. Anaya was on the steps. She was in her coat, the scarf, the version of herself that had no performance in it, the version Harlow had first seen arriving on a Bleecker Street sidewalk 3.5 weeks ago. She was looking out at the street with the expression of someone who had been through something significant and was in the early stages of knowing what that felt like on the other side. She looked up when the door opened. Harlow came and sat beside her on the steps. Close. The decision kind of close. The statement of intent kind. The cold arrived and she did not move away from it. "The story ran," Harlow said. "The story ran," Anaya said. All 3 outlets simultaneously. It's a pause, and in the pause something that was the journalist's specific feeling about a piece of work that had gone out into the world, the particular exposure of it. It's out there now. "I read it," Harlow said. Anaya looked at her. "The last paragraph," Harlow said. Anaya was quiet for a moment. "I wrote it at 1:30 a.m., she said. "I had the story complete and I kept going back to the end of it and it kept feeling like something was missing and then I wrote those sentences and it wasn't missing anymore." "It was the right ending," Harlow said. "It's not an ending," Anaya said. "For the women, for the case, it's not an ending. It's a beginning of a different thing." "Yes," Harlow said. "But for the story, it was the right ending." Anaya looked at her again with the full weight of her attention, which Harlow had been receiving for 6 weeks and which she intended, she had decided, to continue receiving for considerably longer. 11 women at the compound, Anaya said. 11, Harlow said. "Including 3 from the first gala." A silence. The city breathing its 4 a.m. breath. "Are they?" "They will be," Harlow said. "It will take time. But they will be." Anaya nodded. She looked out at the street. She was holding something. Harlow could see the 6 months of it, the building toward this night, the arrival at this step. The story out in the world now, and the women at the compound, and the compound being documented, and the warrants served, and all of it real and complete, and in the process of becoming the past. Anaya, Harlow said. She looked over. Harlow was looking at her with the expression she had been keeping in the folder she wasn't using anymore, the one that had no professional layer, no cover, no operational purpose, the one that was simply true. She had been carrying it for 6 weeks in the space that was not for filing, and she was done carrying it in that space. It's after, she said. Anaya's eyes did the thing they had done at the dinner table on the first night, the fraction of a second where the control released and what was underneath it was visible. The thing that had been there since a 2-second look across a candlelit room and had been building in every encrypted message and every balcony and every coffee shop and every almost. It is, she said. Harlow reached over and took her hand. The same way Anaya had taken hers in the townhouse, simply, with the certainty of a decision already made, the cold of the evening and the warmth of contact arriving simultaneously, both of them real, both of them necessary. They sat on the steps of a precinct at 4 a.m. in February with the city around them, and the case behind them, and the story out in the world, and the 11 names that would be found, and 11 more beyond that, and the long work of consequence beginning. All of it real, all of it still running, the world that had been cracked open still in the process of being cracked. And in the middle of all of it, 2 women on a step. Holding on. Chapter 14, the morning after. They stayed on the steps until 5. Not because there was a reason to stay, there were things to do, there were always things to do. The case had become its own ecosystem of consequence and documentation and coordination that would run for months and required both of them in various capacities starting very soon. There was no operational justification for sitting on precinct steps in February for an hour. They stayed because neither of them moved. The city did its 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. thing around them, the garbage trucks that ran in the particular quiet of that hour, the occasional taxi, the delivery driver with the coffee cart who set up on the corner and looked at them without curiosity because New York had long since exhausted its curiosity about people sitting in unusual places at unusual hours. The cold was consistent and complete, and Harlow was aware of it in the way she was aware of everything, as information, as data, as a condition of the environment. And she was also aware of Anaya's hand in hers and the specific warmth of it, which was not data, which was not a condition of the environment, which was something she had been keeping in the folder that wasn't a folder anymore and was now simply present. They talked. Not about the case. The case had its own rooms now, the precinct rooms, the legal rooms, the long, careful rooms of prosecution and documentation that would contain it for months or years. It did not need these steps. They talked about other things. Anaya told her about Trinidad, not her mother's Trinidad specifically, but the version of it that existed in her mother's kitchen, the smells and the specific density of Saturday mornings growing up. The food that had no adequate translation, and the music that her father had never fully understood and her mother had played anyway. She told it without performance, without the journalist's shaping of a narrative, just the way things surfaced at 5 a.m. when the work was done and the defenses were down and the person beside you had been holding your hand for an hour and you had decided, without making the decision consciously, to let things surface. Harlow told her about Chicago. The apartment with the radiator that made a sound like a man clearing his throat every 40 minutes. She had said this before, in the cover apartment, alone in the small hours, but saying it to Anaya on these steps was different, was the real version of it. The actual radiator in the actual apartment where she had actually grown up with the actual mother who had worked 2 jobs, and the actual father who had been present but passive, and the actual understanding, early, that the world had a version of you it preferred. You've been performing that story for so long it's become the cover, Anaya said. Not critically. Observationally, with the attention she brought to everything, the journalist and the woman indistinguishable in this. Harlow considered that. Yes, she said. What's the part that isn't the cover? Harlow looked at the street. The amber light on wet pavement. That I loved it, she said. Chicago. The apartment, the radiator, the two-job mother. I loved it. I don't include that part because love makes you legible and legible is, she paused. A liability, Anaya said. Yes. In the work. In most things, Harlow said. I got very good at the work and the work got very good at me, and after a while the distinction between the two, she stopped. You start to wonder what's left if you take the work away. Anaya was quiet for a moment. Then, what's left is the person who loved Chicago, she said. And the grandmother who cleaned rooms. And 45 seconds at a dinner table. She paused. And someone who sat on the steps of a precinct at 4 in the morning instead of going inside. Harlow looked at her. That's quite a lot, Anaya said. At 5 they went inside. Not to work, or not only to work. Vega had sent Harlow home at 4:30 with the flat authority of a supervisor who had been doing the work long enough to know the difference between necessary presence and the kind of sustained operation that cost more than it produced, and whose message had said, "Go. It'll be here tomorrow. So will you." That's the point. There was a hotel 2 blocks from the precinct. Not a good hotel, a functional one, the kind that existed to provide sleep in proximity to necessity, with rooms that were clean and small and made no claims beyond their function. They got 2 rooms. The getting of 2 rooms was a conversation that happened without being spoken, the awareness of the hour and the exhaustion, and the case that was still technically running, and the conversation on the steps that had been its own kind of intimacy. And the mutual understanding that what was between them was real enough to be worth not rushing, which was itself a kind of statement. Harlow's room was on the 4th floor. She sat on the edge of the bed in the functional room with the functional furniture, and she looked at her hands. The right one still held the warmth of Anaya's. She noted this. She did not file it. She slept for 5 hours, which was more than she had expected. She woke at 10:30 to 3 messages from Vega, 1 from Ortega, and 1 from a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be the federal prosecutor's office requesting a preliminary interview at 2 p.m. She answered the ones that required answering and set the others aside and sat for a moment in the functional room with the thin February light coming through the curtain and the city, making its morning sound below. She thought about the compound. 11 women. The documentation Ortega had described in his voice that was in the neighborhood of shaking. She would see it this afternoon, before the prosecutor's office, the full picture of what had been built in Dutchess County over 8 years. She would see it, and she would hold it, and she would add it to the folder that was not a folder, and she would carry it the way she carried all of it, the way you carried the cost of the work, which was not by setting it down, but by deciding that what you were carrying it toward was worth the weight. She showered. She put on the clothes she had been wearing the previous evening because there were no other clothes, which was a practical consequence of 6 weeks of deep cover that she had not fully thought through on her way into the hotel. The smoke-gray dress was in a precinct evidence bag. She had her coat. She had the second phone and the regular phone, and the comfortable reality of being in her own shoes, flat, worn, entirely herself, for the first time in 6 weeks. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her hair was down. The same thing that had unsettled her in Marie's vanity mirror in Cassandra's penthouse 6 weeks ago, the window unlocked, the face she barely recognized. She recognized it now. It was just her face. She went downstairs. Anaya was in the hotel's small breakfast room, which ran to coffee and packaged pastries and the particular fluorescent honesty of a room that had never claimed to be anything other than functional. She was at a corner table, wall behind her, sight lines to the door, with her laptop open and her coffee in both hands, and the expression of someone who had slept enough and was now back in the work, but in the gentler version of it. The processing version rather than the building version. She looked up when Harlow came in. Something moved across her face that was quick and not entirely governed, the same fraction of a second from the dinner table on the first night, the control releasing before it reasserted, the thing underneath it visible. It was not a complicated thing. It was just pleased. Uncomplicated, genuine pleased, the expression of someone who had wondered and was now confirmed. "You slept," she said. 5 hours, Harlow said. She got coffee from the machine and sat down across from her. "You?" 6, Anaya said. "I always sleep after a story runs. It's a biological response to deadline." She paused. "Or possibly to 6 months of not sleeping properly." A slight tilt of her head. "How are you?" The question, the way she asked it, the other way, the way from the restaurant on 46th, not the operational way. Harlow considered it honestly. "Strange," she said. "The case is still running, and it's going to run for a long time, but the shape of my days has changed. I've been in cover for 6 weeks. Before that, 2 months of preparation. There's a version of me that's been running continuously since October, and she paused. She's not sure what to do with a morning that doesn't have a mission in it." Anaya looked at her. "What does she want to do with it?" Harlow looked at her coffee. Then at Anaya. "This," she said. "Sit in a bad breakfast room and drink bad coffee and be exactly who I am with no version of anything." Anaya held her gaze. "That sounds manageable," she said. "It does," Harlow agreed. They sat for a moment with the coffee and the fluorescent light and the city going about its Thursday morning through the window. A cab. A woman with a stroller. A man arguing gently with his phone. The ordinary machinery of a city that did not know, in its vast and indifferent way, what had happened in a townhouse on East 73rd Street the night before, though it would know by noon. Because Anaya's story was out there, and stories like that had their own velocity. "The women from the compound," Anaya said. "Have you heard more?" "Ortega called this morning. They've confirmed 14, not 11. She paused. 3 more in a separate part of the structure they accessed after the initial sweep. She held Anaya's gaze. 14. All of your names." Anaya closed her eyes briefly. "Not grief exactly, the specific feeling of something you have been working toward arriving in its full weight. The relief and the cost of it simultaneously." "All 14, she said. "All 14, Harlow said. A silence. The coffee machine behind them made a sound and then was quiet. "I want to meet them," Anaya said. "Eventually. When it's right, when they have the space and the choice. I want them to know they were." She stopped. "I want them to know the story was about them. Not about Cassandra or Vale or the system. About them." "I know," Harlow said. "Is that?" Anaya looked at her. "Professionally. Is that possible?" "It's possible," Harlow said. "We'll build it carefully." "But yes." Anaya nodded. The journalist and the woman again, indistinguishable, both of them present, both of them necessary, the thing that made her what she was. "There are going to be more stories," Anaya said. "The compound documentation, the political connections, the full scope of what Meridian Holdings was. I'll be writing for months." "I know," Harlow said. "And you'll be in depositions and warrant proceedings and preliminary hearings for approximately the same amount of time." "I know," Harlow said. "Which means," Anaya said, with the precision she brought to everything, "that the next several months are going to be complicated," Harlow said. "Complicated," Anaya agreed. She looked at her coffee for a moment. Then, in the tone of someone reaching a conclusion they had been approaching carefully, "I want to be clear about something." Harlow waited. "When I said after," Anaya said, "I didn't mean after the complicated months. I didn't mean after the depositions and the stories and the legal process." She looked up. "I meant after last night. I meant this morning. I meant," she paused, and the precision was still there, but underneath it something that was not precision, something warmer and less governed, the thing that had been in the margins all along and was no longer in the margins. "I meant now. The complicated months are the context. They're not the obstacle." Harlow looked at her. Anaya looked back with the full weight of her attention and the expression that had no professional layer and the slight quality of someone who had just said a precise and vulnerable thing and was holding steady in the exposure. Okay, Harlow said. Anaya's mouth. The real one. The small one. Unhurried and genuine, and Harlow had been watching it since a candlelit dinner table, and she watched it now in the fluorescent light of a functional breakfast room and thought it was, if anything, better in the honest light. Okay, Anaya said. They finished their coffee. Harlow had the federal prosecutor at 2. Anaya had a call with her editor at noon and then 3 hours of follow-up documentation for the second story in what was already becoming a series. The morning had its structure, the structure of lives that had work in them, that would continue to have work in them, that were not cases, but were not empty of purpose either. They had until noon. They stayed in the bad breakfast room for another hour with the bad coffee and the packaged pastries and the fluorescent light, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with the case. About Trinidad and Chicago and the radiator and the specific weight of Saturday mornings and what Anaya had wanted to be before she decided on journalism and what Harlow had wanted to be before the work had decided on her. And the ordinary, unhurried business of two people in the early stages of something real, finding the shape of each other without the pressure of performance or the urgency of a mission. Harlow laughed at something Anaya said. Anaya looked at her when she laughed, the slight surprise of it, the expression of someone storing something away, and said, "You should do that more." "I do it," Harlow said. "You do it privately," Anaya said. "You keep the good laugh for when no one's watching." "You are watching." "I'm always watching," Anaya said. "That's the point." Harlow looked at her. "I pay attention to you specifically," Anaya had said in a restaurant on 46th Street. "Not as a subject." She was still doing it. She was going to keep doing it. Harlow understood that now not as an observation, but as a certainty, the same certainty she had felt when the word after had changed from a country to a set of coordinates, the certainty of something already true waiting for permission to be true out loud. She let herself be watched. It was, she thought, the most significant thing she had done in a very long time. Outside the city ran its Thursday, and somewhere in Dutchess County a compound was being documented, and on 3 websites a story was running that had been built by 2 women across 6 months of risk and precision and 14 names. The consequence of the night before was spreading outward the way consequence spread, with its own momentum, at its own pace, beyond anyone's management now. And in a bad breakfast room 2 blocks from a precinct, 2 women drank bad coffee and found the shape of each other in the ordinary light. Chapter 15, The Fit. Spring came to New York the way spring always came to New York, not gently, not with the pastoral consideration of places that had the space for gradual transitions, but abruptly, rudely, overnight. As though the city had simply decided that February was finished and had moved on without consulting anyone. One morning the air still had the particular weight of winter in it, and the next morning it didn't, and the trees in the park that had been bare and declarative for months were suddenly doing something tentative and green at their edges. Harlow noticed it on her way to the precinct. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, with the full attention of someone who had spent 11 years paying attention professionally and had recently discovered, or rediscovered, that paying attention to things that had nothing to do with a case was its own kind of pleasure. The green at the edges of the trees. The way the light was different, less honest than February light, less exposing, warmer in the way of something that had decided to be kind. A woman on the corner selling flowers that were too early in the season for outside, but existed anyway because New York did not wait for the appropriate conditions. She bought one. A yellow one. She did not examine why. She carried it to the precinct and put it in a cup on her desk, and Vega looked at it when she walked past and said nothing, which was Vega's version of a comment. It had been 8 weeks since the townhouse on East 73rd Street. 8 weeks in which the case had become its own country, vast, detailed, requiring its own geography of attention. The federal prosecution was building toward a trial date that was still months away. Cassandra Vale had retained 3 lawyers and was conducting herself with the composed precision of someone who understood that the composure was now the only instrument she had left and intended to use it to its full capacity. Her lawyers were making arguments about circumstances and context and the particular legal territory of charges that were straightforward and also enormously complicated in the way of things that had been running for 8 years through layers of plausible deniability. The arguments were not going well. The evidence was too clean. The documentation too thorough. The financial records and the property documentation and the 3 months of correspondence and the compound itself. The compound most of all. The compound that had produced its own category of evidence that Ortega's team had spent 6 weeks processing. The full picture of what had existed on 42 acres in Dutchess County for 8 years. The full picture that had required Harlow to sit for a long time in a room in the precinct after she saw it before she was able to work again. The evidence was Anaya's. The structure of it, the architecture of a case-built document by document over 6 months, was Anaya's. The federal prosecutor had said this explicitly in a preliminary hearing that Harlow had attended and which had produced the specific feeling of watching someone new. She had not finished that thought at the time. She finished it now, walking to the precinct with a yellow flower in the abrupt spring. Someone you love being seen clearly by a room that had the authority to confirm what they had built. She held the thought. She did not file it. She had stopped filing things some time ago, and the folder that was not a folder had grown into something that was simply her life, which was apparently what happened when you stopped managing the edges of it so carefully. Things spread. Things took up space. Things were, it turned out, not liabilities. Marcus Vale had entered a plea. Not the full plea, his lawyers were still negotiating the shape of it, but enough of a plea that the political connection was confirmed in the official record, which was what Anaya had needed for the 4th story in the series. Councilman David Park had not entered a plea and was showing every sign of not entering one, which was the response of a man who had spent 7 years practicing the art of not knowing and believed he could sustain the performance through a trial. His approval ratings had dropped 41 points in 8 weeks. The city, it turned out, was capable of looking when someone made it look. Aaron Marsh had been suspended pending full investigation. He had not been arrested yet. The case against him was being built carefully, with the specific patience of people who wanted it to stick, who wanted every charge to be clean and every piece of evidence to be unassailable. Vega was building it. She was, in Harlow's assessment, going to build it very well. The 14 women from the compound were in various stages of various things. This was the only way Harlow had found to hold it, the acknowledgement that there was no single trajectory. That 14 people had 14 paths and all of them were long and none of them were simple, and the only honest thing she could say about any of them was that they were moving, which was what they had not been able to do before, and which was therefore the most important thing. She had met 3 of them. Carefully, with the coordination of the support teams and the specific patience of allowing people to choose what they wanted rather than what was operationally useful. 3 women who had sat in a room with her and said things that she had listened to with the full weight of her attention, which was the only thing she had to offer, and which she had offered completely. She had gone home after each meeting and sat for a while in her apartment, her actual apartment, not the cover one, which had been returned to the department's roster of cover spaces with the specific relief of handing back something that was never hers. And she had held what she was carrying. She was getting better at holding things without needing to manage them. Anaya's series had now run to 6 pieces. The first night's story had been the foundation, the pipeline, the gala, the compound, the names. The subsequent pieces had built outward from it, the financial architecture of Meridian Holdings, the political connections and their cost to the city, the systemic failure of the missing persons reports, and then the piece that had produced the most response, more than the exposure, more than the financial documentation, the piece about the women. Not the compound. Not the crime. The women themselves. Anaya had written it with the permission of 4 of the 14, who had chosen to be named and to speak in their own words about the lives they had been living before the cultivation, before the gala, before the car. The piece contained no judgment and no pity and no rescue narrative. It contained people. Their specific, ordinary, irreducible personhood. What they had wanted. What they had been working toward. What the city had failed to see, and what the city was therefore obligated to look at now. Harlow had read it 3 times. The second time she had called Anaya while reading it, and said nothing, and Anaya had said nothing back, and they had stayed on the phone for 4 minutes with the peace between them, and the silence that was its own kind of conversation. The kind that 2 people had when they had been paying attention to each other for long enough that silence was not an absence, but a presence. The 3rd time she had read it she had thought, this is why she does the work. Not the exposé, not the political story, not the legal architecture of a prosecution. This. The piece that said, these were people. These were people and they were here and you did not look and you are looking now. She was meeting Anaya at noon. Not the encrypted drop. Not the operational phone. Not the precinct or the prosecutor's office or any of the rooms the case had occupied. She was meeting Anaya at a place on the west side that Anaya had described as having good coffee and no particular significance except that she had been going there on Sunday mornings since she moved to New York and it was, she had said, the most herself she had a fixed location for. Harlow was early. She was always early. She had accepted this about herself some time ago. The place was a coffee shop that had been there long enough to have stopped trying to be anything specific and had arrived, through the accumulation of years and the particular democracy of a room that had served a neighborhood for long enough, at something that was simply itself. Mismatched chairs. A counter that had opinions about what it sold. The sound of a neighborhood on a Sunday morning or a Thursday, which was what this was, but with the particular lightness of a Thursday that had been cleared of obligations by 2 people who had decided, separately and then together, that the clearing was necessary. She sat at a table near the window. She held the yellow flower, which she had been carrying since the precinct, which she had not entirely planned to bring, and which was here anyway. She thought about 8 weeks ago. About a street in February that smelled like the truth of February. About a black car and a shoebox, ivory with a black ribbon, held in both hands with a care that was almost ceremonial. About the particular cold of a West 28th Street sidewalk and the women who had been there and the one she had become, for 19 days, for the work. She thought about the heel. Not the physical heel, the meaning of it. The thing Cassandra had built her entire selection mechanism around, the Cinderella logic of the fit, the idea that the right woman would be found by the thing that fit her. She had used it as an instrument of selection and control. The fit confirmed that the woman could be shaped into what the evening required. The fit was a trap. But there was something Cassandra had not understood about fitting. A thing that fit you, a shoe, a dress, a room, a person, was not a trap unless you did not know it was a fit. The fit itself was neutral. What mattered was who held the knowing. Cassandra had believed she held it. She had believed that finding the fit meant she owned it, that the knowledge of the fit was her instrument. She had not understood that Harlow had known the fit from the first moment, had walked into it with full knowledge of what it was, had worn it the way she wore everything she chose deliberately, completely, without apology, on her own terms. The trap had been for the woman who said it. The fit had been Harlow's all along. The door opened. Anaya came in from the Thursday morning with her coat and her scarf and the version of herself that had no performance in it and never needed one. The version that Harlow had been learning the shape of for 8 weeks in breakfast rooms and phone calls and Sunday afternoons that had started as one thing and become something else, longer, more settled. The accumulation of ordinary time that was its own kind of extraordinary. She clocked the room in the time it took to walk from the door to the table. Harlow watched her do it and felt the thing that she had stopped filing and had simply accepted as a permanent condition of her internal landscape, warm and specific and entirely without the quality of a liability. Anaya reached the table. She looked at the yellow flower. She looked at Harlow. "You brought a flower," she said. "I bought it on the way," Harlow said. "From a woman on the corner." "It's not the season for it," Anaya said. "New York doesn't wait for the appropriate conditions," Harlow said. Something moved across Anaya's face, the real smile, not the almost, the full version that Harlow had been watching arrive in increments since a candlelit room and was now, 8 weeks in, something she saw regularly and had not yet stopped finding remarkable. She sat down. She took the flower from Harlow's hand, not in the way you took something offered, but in the way you took something that belonged to you, the ease of it, the certainty, the same way she had taken her hand on the steps of the precinct and held it against the cold. She put it in her water glass, where it stood without particular elegance and with the specific conviction of something that had found the place it was going to be. "The fourth woman," Anaya said. Her tone was the other way, not the journalist, not the work, the personal one. "From the compound. Her lawyer called me yesterday." Harlow looked at her. "And?" "She wants to talk," Anaya said. "She has something she wants to say that she doesn't think fit in the piece. Something she wants on record in a different way." Anaya held her gaze. She asked if she could meet the detective who went into the room. The room. The side room in the townhouse on East 73rd Street. The 23-year-old with the stillness that was safety rather than peace who had said okay when Harlow told her she was going to be all right and Harlow had needed her to believe it. She had not known that woman was among the 14 found at the compound. She knew it now. "Yes," she said. "Tell her yes." Anaya nodded. She had known the answer, had known before she asked, the way she knew most things about Harlow now, with the accumulated certainty of sustained attention, but she had asked anyway because the asking mattered, because the choice mattered. Because this was what it looked like to pay attention to someone specifically without using what you found. The coffee arrived. They ordered it the way they ordered things now, without asking each other, without consultation, the knowledge of the other person's preference having become the kind of knowledge that lived in the body rather than the mind. Harlow's black. Anaya's with 1 sugar and the particular expression of someone who considered this a private vice. "How's the deposition prep?" Anaya asked. "Complete," Harlow said. "Vega runs it next week." "And after that?" Harlow looked at her. "After that the prosecutors have what they need from me until the trial." A pause. "Which gives me approximately 4 months of mornings." "For months of mornings," Anaya said. "I've been thinking," Harlow said, "about what to do with them." Anaya held her coffee in both hands and looked at Harlow over the rim of it with the dark, direct gaze that had been the first thing Harlow had registered across a candlelit room, the attention, the weight of it. The quality of being actually looked at by someone who was actually looking. "What have you been thinking?" she said. "That I've been performing the version of my life that the work required for so long," Harlow said, "that I'm not entirely sure what the unrequired version looks like." She held Anaya's gaze. "I thought it might be useful to find out with someone who pays attention to the process." Anaya was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop moved around them. The neighborhood on its Thursday. The spring outside the window making its abrupt, rude, overnight claim on the city. The yellow flower in its water glass, standing without elegance, entirely committed to being where it was. "I've been thinking something adjacent," Anaya said. Her voice was the private register, the one she used for true things, the one Harlow had learned to recognize from the first night on the balcony as the sound of the armor being set down. "I've been thinking that I built a very good life out of the work and the careful management of everything adjacent to it." A pause. "And I've been thinking that careful management is a useful skill and also, occasionally, a way of not having the thing you're carefully managing the edges of." "What thing?" Harlow said. Anaya looked at her. "This," she said. Simply. The word that contained everything she meant and required nothing in addition. Harlow looked back at her. The distance across the table was the distance it always was now, the distance of 2 people who had decided on closeness, who were in the daily practice of it, who had been moving toward each other since a balcony that wasn't on the floor plan and had arrived somewhere that required no floor plan because they were making the map as they went. Then stop managing the edges, Harlow said. I'm working on it, Anaya said. The small smile. The real one. I know, Harlow said. I'm watching. Anaya's eyes. The thing that lived at the back of them, the calculation, the attention, the warmth that had no performance in it, because this was not a performance and had not been one since the first night on the balcony in the February dark. I know you are, she said. Outside, the spring continued its abrupt and rude and entirely characteristic arrival. The trees along the street were doing their tentative green thing. The city was running its Thursday. The world that had been cracked open 8 weeks ago on East 73rd Street was in the long process of reorganizing itself around the crack, the trial building. The stories running, the women moving, each of them on their own long path, the consequence spreading outward in ways that would take years to fully map. And in a coffee shop on the west side, in mismatched chairs, with bad coffee and a yellow flower in a water glass, 2 women sat in the ordinary light of an abrupt spring morning and found, in the daily practice of each other, the shape of something that fit. Not because it had been chosen for them. Not because someone had arrived with a box and a ribbon and the certainty that they knew what the right fit looked like. Because they had chosen it themselves. With full knowledge of what it was. On their own terms. The fit, as it turned out, had always been theirs. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.